We will move on. I don't know about you, but there's seldom much more irritating than to call someone on the telephone and get their answering machine and have about a 2-minute message that they're giving you before it goes beep and you can leave a message. But occasionally there's some messages that are so innovative that you don't mind listening to them. Here are some that have been on some people's answering machines. Hello, you are talking to a machine. I'm capable of receiving messages. My owners do not need siding, windows, or a hot tub, and their carpets are clean. They give to charity through their office and do not need their picture taken. If you're still with me, leave your name and number and they will get back to you. So I thought that was a pretty good one. Here's another one. Hi, I'm probably home. I'm just avoiding someone I don't like. Leave me a message, and if I don't call back, it's you. Hello, this is the Brown residence. We're in the middle of a family fight right now. Leave your name and number at the beep, and whoever wins will call you right back. Hello, I'm home right now, but cannot find the phone. Please leave a message, and I'll call you up as soon as I find it. I can't come to the phone now because I have amnesia, and I feel stupid talking to people I don't remember. I'd appreciate it if you could help me out by leaving my name and telling me something about myself. Thank you. Now here's a rather somber one. Hello, this is death. I'm not in right now, but if you leave your name and number, I'll be right with you. Sorry, Chris and Susan aren't here right now. Please leave your name and number after the tone. If you're calling regarding an outstanding debt, please leave your message before the tone. And then there's the multiple telephone trees you have to go through before you end up with a real person. Those are so irritating. Press 2, and then you press 1 and 3 and so on. This one, welcome to the psychiatric hotline. If you are obsessive compulsive, please press 1 repeatedly. If you're codependent, please ask someone else to press 2. If you have multiple personalities, press 3, 4, 5, and 6. If you're paranoid delusional, we know who you are and what you want. Just stay on the line so we can trace the call. If you're schizophrenic, listen carefully, and a little voice will tell you which number to press. If you're manic depressive, it doesn't matter which number you press. No one will answer. If you're delusional and occasionally hallucinate, please be aware that the thing you're holding on the side of your head is alive and about to bite off your ear. They're kind of humorous, aren't they? We're going to talk tonight about communication. Making love last a lifetime. Communication is an essential part of that. We all have tongues, we all have ears, but it's amazing how we don't communicate very well sometimes and how quickly we can jump to conclusions. When I was in my older teens, I went up to the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland to sell books to earn a scholarship to Newbold College. And the very first day that I went out, I was on my bicycle. I had pannier bags on the back with some of my books there and a briefcase strapped on the back. And I went through Kirkwall, the town, the capital, which wasn't very large, and each door didn't seem to be the right door to be the first door to... I am not a naturally born salesman. So I finally got out into the country, and I thought, well, maybe I'll find the right house here. But no house seemed to be the right house. So I just kept cycling and cycling until I got to the end of the island. And so now I had the last house on the island, which was a farm. So I went up and I knocked on the door. And a lady came to the door, invited me in. I thought, this is nice. But when I went in, I discovered she was a tinker lady, and she had an array of watches spread out that she was trying to sell to the farmer, but she graciously let me have my say. Now, the way we did it back in those days when we went canvassing, even though we were riding a bicycle, I wore my gray flannel trousers, white shirt, blazer with a tie, Newbold badge, crest on it, so you look very smart and posh. And as I started my canvass, the farmer started laughing. And he laughed, and he laughed, and he laughed all through my canvass. Now, this was my very first time. I was not very experienced. I did not know what to say or what to do, so I just went through what I had memorized. And at the end I called for the order, and he said no. But the tinker lady said that if I would come to her house, she would buy one of my volumes. So I thought, well, that's okay. So she gave me her name and address. And then later that week, I went to see her. And then she told me why this farmer was laughing all the time. You see, up in those islands, to avoid the IRS, a lot of the farmers would hide their money in their house, in closets and so on, wouldn't put it in the bank so the IRS wouldn't know how much money they had. So when I came in with my briefcase all dressed so smart, he thought I was an IRS agent coming to check him out. And when he discovered that I was just a salesman, he was so relieved that he just laughed and laughed and laughed at how foolish he had been to think that I was such an individual. And as she told me that story, I came to realize how easy it is for us to misunderstand each other. And so many issues in relationships, whether in marriages or whether at work and in the church, occur because we jump to conclusions before we have all the information. And oftentimes, we're so certain we're right, we start telling other people, and that becomes gossip. And pretty soon this is circulating around, and all kinds of problems can arise simply because we've not taken the time to check out what is the truth and what is really going on. And I want to look at a story in the Bible that is just an outstanding story on the dangers that you get into when you jump to conclusions without listening and finding out the whole story. It's found in the book of Joshua, chapter 22. And the Israelites were in the process of conquering the land of Canaan, and 2.5 of the tribes, Moses had allowed them to remain on the east bank of the Jordan, and the others were on the west bank of the Jordan. And we start with chapter 22, verse 1. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded." Because part of the agreement was that they would fight on the west bank till they'd conquered the territory, and then they could go back. He says, "For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your brothers, but have carried out the mission the Lord your God gave you. Now that the Lord your God has given your brothers rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land." You can go back to the east side of the Jordan. "That Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan." But now he gives an admonition. "But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to obey his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and all your soul." Then Joshua blessed them, sent them away, and they went to their homes. And when they came to Gilaloth near the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they'd built an altar on the border of Canaan at Gilaloth near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. So what was going on? These 2.5 tribes had gone back to the east side of the Jordan. They built this imposing altar. The 9.5 other tribes heard about it, and they said, "That can't be. The only place you can worship is where the ark is, Shiloh, the tabernacle." And they started to get upset, and the record says that they prepared to... A civil war was about to begin over this issue of an altar being built. See, they had promised the Lord that they would not worship foreign idols. They had promised the Lord that they would not follow the gods of the Canaanites. And here it seemed to the rest of Israel that already these 2.5 tribes were starting to apostatize. Fortunately, before they began their civil war, some cooler heads prevailed. And we read, going on, "So the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With him they sent 10 of the chief men, one for each of the tribes of Israel, each the head of a family division." They said, well, we better just go and check this out just before we go to war among the Israelites' clans. And when they went to Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they said to them, "The whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him? Was not the sin of Peor enough for us?" Now what's going on? The delegation begins by assuming that they know what's happening. Notice they didn't go to them and say, "Would you tell us why you built this altar? Would you tell us what's going on here? Would you tell us the motivation?" They already knew. And so they jumped right in, accusing them, telling them, lambasting them, "You are terrible, you're sinning against the Lord for what you are doing." Have you ever found yourself falling into that same trap, assuming that you already know? There's some people that like to finish other people's sentences. Have you ever had that experience? Sometimes husbands do that to wives, or wives do that to husbands. And there's nothing more irritating, especially if the way they finish it is not what you were going to say. And you have to watch that. Some in our family are like that. And so I said, well, if you know, you just go right ahead and give me the rest of the speech if you know what I'm going to say. Florence Roberts was on a flight, between flights at an airport. And she went to one of the little stands there and bought some chocolate chip cookies. And they put them in a little brown paper bag. And then she went to sit in the area where you sit waiting for her flight. And after a while, she heard a rustling next to her. And she looked, and there was a man sitting in the seat. And he was dipping into the paper bag and taking out a chocolate chip cookie and eating it. Well, she was flabbergasted. How dare anyone take her chocolate chip cookies? So she reached in and she said, well, I better have one anyway. So she took one out and she started eating her chocolate chip cookie. And then this man put his hand in the paper bag and pulled out another chocolate chip cookie. And her blood pressure was starting to raise, and she didn't know what to say, and she didn't want to confront him because she didn't know how he would react. And they got down to the last cookie. And he was so audacious that he took the last cookie, split it in two, pushed one half across to her, and took the other half and ate it. And then he got up and went to the gate. Well, she was just about ready to have a heart attack. And finally, when her gate was called, she went and she opened her handbag to get out her ticket, and there was her paper bag of chocolate chip cookies sitting in there that she had bought at that store. She had been stealing the chocolate chip cookies from the other guy. Have you ever had an experience like that? And suddenly she realized that all that blood pressure going up was for nothing. And again, we have so many experiences like that, that when we know the full truth, we didn't need to be anxious. We didn't need to be upset. But we get ourselves into trouble because we think we already know, that we already understand what's going on. And that was what was happening there in Israel. They were ready to have a civil war. They were already jumping on their case, accusing them of deserting the Lord already. And what happened next? Well, they continued their tirade. Up to this very day, we've not cleansed ourselves from that sin, even though a plague fell on the community of the Lord. They're talking about Peor. Do you remember what Peor is? P-E-O-R? That was where Balaam had tried to curse the Israelites, and instead he had blessed them. And then he found another way to seduce them, and they'd sent men and women into their camp, and they committed all kind of adultery there. And the thousands died. God sent a plague. And so that was still very fresh in their minds. And are you now turning away from the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole community of Israel. If the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and share the Lord with us. If you don't like it where you are, well, come with us. There's still enough room. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar for yourselves, rather than the altar of the Lord our God. When Achan, son of Zerah, acted unfaithfully regarding the devoted things, did not wrath come upon the whole community of Israel? He was not the only one who died for his sin. Wow. They hardly paused for breath. They were so sure they were right. They just went on and on and on and on. And Reuben and Gad and Manasseh just sat there waiting until they were all done. And then here's their reply. Then Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel. They said, "The mighty one, God the Lord, the mighty one, God the Lord, he knows. And let Israel know, if this has been in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain sacrifices, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us to account. No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, 'What do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you, you Reubenites and Gadites. You have no share in the Lord, so your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord.' That is why we said, 'Let us get ready and build an altar, not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it is to be a witness between us and you and the generations that follow, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. Then in the future your descendants shall not be able to say to ours,'" by the way, they're as long-winded in their reply as the others were in their accusation, "'but as a witness between us and you, and will not say you have no share in the Lord.' And we said, if they ever say this to us or to our descendants, we will answer, 'Look at the replica of the Lord's altar which our fathers built, not for burnt offerings and sacrifices, but as a witness between us and you. Far be it from us to rebel against the Lord and turn away from him today by building an altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sacrifices, other than the altar of the Lord our God that stands before his tabernacle.'" Wow. Totally misunderstood the situation. They were not in rebellion at all. It was to be a reminder that they were one, even though separated by the Jordan River. And suddenly the accusing delegation sees that they got it all wrong. A good thing that they understood now what was happening. But so often we jump to conclusions. A sociologist on an African jungle expedition held up her camera to take pictures of some children at play when they suddenly started screaming, "No, no, 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 no." And so she quickly backed away and she said to the chief, I apologize so much. She said, "I'm so sorry. I understand in some cultures that the people think that if you take a picture that it's capturing their spirit and they'll somehow die and lose themselves. And I didn't mean to do that at all." And the chief said, "Put your fears to rest." He said, "All the children were trying to tell you was you haven't taken the cap off your lens yet on your camera. That's all they were trying to tell you." But she had jumped to conclusions without checking out all that was going on. And so Phinehas and his delegation, we read that they were pleased. And Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, said to Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, "Today we know that the Lord is with us, because you have not acted unfaithfully toward the Lord in this matter. Now you have rescued the Israelites from the Lord's hand." And then Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, and the leaders returned to Canaan from their meeting with the Reubenites and Gadites in Gilead, and reported to the Israelites. They were glad. I guess I hadn't done that in time. Did you get a picture of that? All right. They were glad to hear the report and praise God, and they talked no more about going to war against them to devastate the country where the Reubenites and the Gadites lived. And the Reubenites and the Gadites gave the altar this name, "A witness between us that the Lord is God." But look at this story. It's one of the most astounding in the Old Testament. They're ready to have civil war. They're ready to start fighting against each other simply because they jump to conclusions they were not willing to listen first. I think it's significant that when God created us, he gave us how many listening devices? 2. And how many speaking devices? 1. And yet so often we use this twice as much as we use this. He didn't give it so we'd have stereo. He gave it to us, I think, to emphasize that we need to listen twice as much as we talk. But we forget about that. And it's only through talking and communicating and listening that we can hear the perceptions of other people and not judge them. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 7:1, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." And that's so hard for us not to do, isn't it? We think we know. We think we understand. And we've not delved into the experience of the other person to find out really where they are. So many conflicts arise in the home, in the church, and at home because we think that we know what's going on. When I left Newbold College to go to La Sierra College in California, I was going because of a girl I had dated at Newbold, and she had gone the year before to La Sierra to get her music degree, and we'd broken up, and I thought that was the end, and I was dating some other girls, and then she started writing to me and suggested that if we were to get our relationship back together again, I would need to be not 6,000 miles away, but present on campus. So I said, okay, and so I made my way across the ocean to La Sierra. And then one day when I was studying in the library, there was this quite attractive girl sitting opposite me, and one day she came in, she brought me some records. This was back in the days when you still had records, 33 RPMs. And she had learned that I liked Mozart, and so she lent me 2 records of Mozart's horn concertos. Well, people don't normally lend you records just like that, and I took them and I thought, why is she lending these to me? Is she liking me in some way? Is she wanting me to ask her out? And so I made certain assumptions, and because I was dating this other girl and I was a bit shy with girls, I was not really that forward, I quit going to the library so I wouldn't meet her. And I still kept the records, and it was kind of awkward, because when I wanted to check books out, I'd ask one of my friends that I made if he'd go and check the book out of the library, and I'd give him my library card. Last year was a big enough campus that you wouldn't run into other people that often, unless you were in the library where all the students are congregating. I didn't have any classes with this girl. Later on, when Ula, the girl that I'd been dating, broke up with me for the second time, I discovered that this young lady did have designs on me. In fact, after the first time she met me, I'd arrived in October of that year. She went home for Thanksgiving, and she told her mother that she had met the man she was going to marry, and he didn't know it yet. That was how sure she was about it. Well, we ended up getting married. And we've been married 41 years, just celebrated our 41st wedding anniversary. So here was a case where I made the correct assumption about what was going on, and I acted upon it. And so sometimes we make correct assumptions, and that's fine. But many times we don't make the correct assumptions. And so we get ourselves into difficulties, and so many conflicts arise because we've not taken time to listen, we've not taken time to process, we've not taken time to understand the other person's point of view. When I had to earn my way through La Sierra too, just like Newbold, and my Cole Porter scholarship that took me through Newbold for 1 whole year lasted half of 1 semester at La Sierra. That's how much more expensive it was. So during the summer, I went canvassing up in the Mojave Desert. Victorville was where I was staying, in the schoolhouse there. And there were 6 of us staying in the schoolhouse canvassing. And one day, some of the fellows came back and said, watch out for the German shepherds. They're kind of vicious around here, and they'll bite you. So for the next several days, I, in fear and trembling, every gate I went through and every door I knocked on, I was wondering whether there was some shepherd who had immigrated from Germany who was going to jump out. Now, why are you smiling? I mean, a shepherd looks after sheep, and I hadn't seen any sheep around there in the desert. And a German shepherd is a shepherd from Germany who's immigrated to America, right? Because that was the assumption that I made, because where I came from, that's what they were. After a while, through listening to them enough, I discovered they were talking about a certain kind of dog. I've been ignoring these dogs all the time, living in fear of these maniac German immigrants, you know, who are out there. And finally, when I realized what was going on, I said, why didn't you say Alsatians? If you had said Alsatians, I would have known what you're talking about. And they, well, we don't know what Alsatians are. I said, that's what we call them in Europe. Never heard the term German Shepherd before. So sometimes misunderstanding can arise through no fault of your own. You've got to remember that too. So don't always get concerned because I had no way of knowing that I was making the wrong assumption on that. And that can get us into difficulties too, especially when different cultures get together and people of different cultures, you know, marry. So many English words are different. In England, pants are what you wear under your trousers. And so when someone says they spilled something on their pants, it has another meaning in England, you know, than what it has here. And, you know, a trunk is the boot, and a hood is the bonnet, and an accelerator is the throttle, and the windscreen is the windshield, and so on and so on. So many words have different meanings. And we don't have aluminum siding in England. When we do have it, it's aluminium siding, and so on. And so cultures can bring their own communication difficulties as well, especially when you start using symbols. You have to be careful. In this country, if you use this symbol, that means good. You know, you did well. Where I came from in Africa, if you use that, that was an insult. And you could get almost stabbed to death if you were to do that to someone. So again, communication is very important. Jesus, or Paul, talking about communication, talks about another kind that seems foolishness to many people. He says, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. You know, preaching seems such a useless activity to so many people. Just words. But when the Holy Spirit takes it, when the Holy Spirit works upon people's hearts, what seems foolishness is no longer foolishness. And I have long since learned in communicating that people are not won primarily by your logic or by your arguments. And Pastor Gary did a very nice job this morning in his presentation where he talked about how important it is to love people. You can have the truth and you can be totally right and still miss heaven if you haven't learned to really love and be gracious to those around you. Early in my ministry, I was giving Bible studies to a family, and they had a young man who was a friend of theirs coming, and he said, I'm not going to believe in God unless I can see him. He says, I can only believe what I can see. And he says, if you were to open the sky and show me God, then I would believe. And I was very young in the ministry and very naive, so I took him at his word and said, all right, and let's see about that. So I started using some logic. So I said, have you ever seen Hitler? No. Well, how do you know that Hitler existed if you haven't seen him? Well, I don't believe Hitler existed. Okay? He was being consistent. What about Napoleon? Do you believe Napoleon existed? Oh, yes. Did you ever see Napoleon? No. Then how do you know Napoleon existed? Well, I guess I don't believe in Napoleon. So I thought, this is going good. You know, he'll get the point. And so I gave a couple more examples, and finally I said, do you believe that people lived in the 16th century? Well, yes. Have you ever seen anyone who lived in the 16th century? No. Then how do you know anyone lived in the 16th century? Well, he said, I guess I don't. And then he kind of laughed, and we all laughed because it was now getting absurd. But you know what? I never convinced him about God. And I never won him to Jesus Christ. Logic and truth in and by itself is not going to help people at all in communicating God's love and your love in the family and wherever you are. That's why, and coming back to our text here, the stumbling block that's in the Greek is the word scandalon, from which we get our English word scandal. And it seems so absurd to the people back in those days that a man dying on a cross could have any kind of eternal significance. How could that possibly be? That was just something that didn't make sense at all. And today's modern world, it doesn't make sense. I've been reading a fascinating book by Richard Dawkins. He's probably the world's leading atheist. It's called The God Delusion. You'll see it in the bookstores all over the place. It makes me mad half the time because he's got such a wrong picture of Christianity. But part of the reason he's got such a wrong picture is he's never met a real Christian. I believe he's never met a loving Christian. In that book, he quotes some of the letters that he's got from Christians complaining about him writing against God. And one of them is unbelievable. It says, because you don't believe in God, he says, you are going to rot in hell. And not only are you going to rot, but you're going to burn. And I wish I could be there to watch you burn piece by piece, starting with your toenails, and he went up through his anatomy, up to your head. And this graphic description signed a Christian. Well, are you going to believe in a God and Christianity when Christians act that kind of way towards you? And that's why the cross becomes that scandal, that scandalon, because so many of us don't present it in the right way. I've no doubt that that person thought he was doing the right thing, but no one is won by that kind of language or that kind of argument. And that's why Jesus, just before he died, told his disciples, everyone will know that you are my disciples by how you love one another. And when Jesus was saying that, he wasn't talking primarily about how you love the world. You understand what I'm saying? When you work in the secular marketplace, you know you're supposed to be kind to the agnostic in the pew, in the office next to you. You know you've got to be kind to the atheist. You know you've got to be kind to the difficult people, because you're a Christian and they're not. So that's not so difficult. But Jesus wasn't talking about us, how we relate to non-Christians. He was talking to his disciples. And he said the true test is how we relate to other Christians and other people in the church. Do you know, oftentimes it's much harder to love someone in the church than someone in the world, because we have higher expectations for people in the church. In the world, we know they aren't converted, aren't saved, so we know they're not loving, we know they're selfish, so we expect them to be angry and upset and backbiting and gossiping. But when we get into the church, suddenly we expect everyone to be at this level up here, loving and kind and gracious and forgiving. And if they make a mistake, oh yes, I'm so sorry I made that mistake, please forgive me. But that isn't the reality, is it? Because we're still sinners. We're still struggling. And all of us are at different levels. And I tell people, part of how you understand to work with people is chronological age has no relationship to spiritual age. Someone can be 45 years old chronologically and 3 months old as a Christian. Some of them may have been 3 months old for 20 years, and we kind of call that retarded when it's, physically so. And there are retarded Christians. And someone can be 20 years old chronologically and 15 years old as a Christian. And if you start to understand that, I find it helps me be a lot more sympathetic, because when a 3-month-old baby burps and throws up their food, you just kind of smile and expect it. But if a 16-year-old burps and throws up their food over the dinner table, you have a totally different reaction, right? Because that's not what you expect. But in the church, we have a lot of 3-month-old babies burping up all the time. Now, they may be 35 years old and 55 years old, but they're still burping up because they're spiritually immature. But we're expecting them to be mature people. And that's why Jesus says, do not judge. Love each other. Because we're not saved by how mature we are. We're saved by how mature Jesus is. We're not saved by how good we are. We're saved by how good Jesus is. And he loves and has saved the 3-month-old just as much as the 45-year-old. There may be Enochs in our church, and then we've got, Peters and James and John and all of this. And that's why Jesus said the test for the world is not how we relate to the world. The test is how do we relate within our own community. And when churches fight and Christian families fight, that does more dishonor to God than anything else that we can possibly do, because the truth of whether we're in Jesus is how we love each other within a community of faith, and how we forgive, and how we listen to what they're saying. 38 years ago, no, 41 years ago, why say 38? Well, I guess I got the wrong figures here. I made the right judgment and married the girl of my dreams. And I appeal to you today to make sure that you've accepted God's grace and that there's no misunderstandings between you and God. And we still struggle with that at times, but the important thing is to say when we do mess up, God, help me to do better next time. Help me to listen a little bit more. And my wife and I have had our spats over the years. Our first big fight was over potatoes. She wasn't giving me potatoes every day, and the good Englishman has to have potatoes. And she would say, well, you've got cabbage, and you've got lettuce, and you've got carrots. And I'd say, well, those are not potatoes. She said, well, potatoes are vegetable, and so we had this big argument and then she finally said, well, you can cook then if you want to. I hated cooking. And she was a home ec major, so she was a great cook, and I loved her cooking. So finally I realized I was in the wrong over this whole communication thing, and brought her 10 red roses and apologized and said I'm sorry. And after a while I didn't miss my potatoes quite so much anymore. But as a Christian, that's what we have to do. It doesn't mean that you're never going to mess up. It doesn't mean that you're never going to misunderstand. It doesn't mean that you're not always going to be the person that you want to be. The definition, I believe, of a Christian is that a Christian admits when they've made a mistake, asks forgiveness, and puts it right. That's the key quality of a Christian. And the more we mature, the more we're willing to stand before God and let him prune us and shape us and trim us into a wonderful person for him. And as long as we're communicating carefully in the vertical relationship, God will help us make sure that we communicate horizontally with each other for his glory, so the world will be able to truly say, wow, look at Glendale, look at Phoenix, or whatever church you belong to. Look at them. What a marvelous group of people they are, how they love each other. I want to know more about that love and that God that they serve. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you that you've given us one tongue and two ears. Teach us how not to jump to conclusions, to make assumptions, but to listen carefully, to speak the truth in love, and to long again and wait eagerly for your coming, growing and becoming the people that you want us to be. In your name I pray. Amen. Oh, by the way, some of you are wanting some of my sermons or some of these messages. Most of these are on our webpage, and so if you go to lookingforachurch.org, that's an easy one to remember. Lookingforachurch.org, you can download or you can listen or whatever you want on previous sermons and other information we have there for you. Thank you.
We'll also be having CDs